Today I wanted to show you how I like to cast on for the fingertips of this glove. So this glove pattern is worked from the fingertips down, and I do find casting on that a number of stitches at the top of the fingers can be a little bit challenging to work with. So I wanted to show you the way that I do it. The pattern is going to have you begin by casting on 4 stitches, and I like to cast on all 4 onto just one needle. And you can use double pointed needles or circular needles to do this magic loop, whichever one you prefer. And after I cast on those 4 stitches, instead of inserting another needle here and dividing them onto 2 different needles, I like to just keep them on one needle, and I'm going to push them all the way down to the other end of our needle. This is exactly the same as you would work an I-cord. And so to join in the round with just the 4 stitches on my needle, I'm just going to begin knitting on the other side of my needle. And when I go to knit this first stitch, it's going to look like my yarn is on the wrong side, like it comes from the other end, because that is where my yarn is connected. That's where it's supposed to be for this project. And the pattern is then going to have us knit into the front and the back of each stitch. And so that's what you're going to do, knit into the front and the back of each stitch while just working with the 2 needles, just as in a normal project that was not joined in the round. At this point, you are going to have 8 stitches on your needles, and now you're going to be introducing another needle. So once you have your 8 stitches on your needle, I'm going to have you slide half of those stitches onto a second needle. And again, whether this is magic loop or double pointed needles, you can do the exact same thing. So I have put 4 stitches on each of my 2 needles, and I'm going to hold them like this, parallel to each other. And now I'm going to do the knitting with the 3rd needle. And in terms of deciding where you should be starting on this, you're always going to find your working yarn. That's always going to be connected to the last stitch that you did. And when we're working in the round, we don't ever want to knit into the same stitch, because that would mean we were turning around and going back the way we came. So we never want to knit in the same stitch where our working yarn is connected. We always want to knit in the stitch right next to it. So I'm going to begin my next row, which the pattern has us just knit every stitch of that row right there on the needle that is in front. And I'm just going to knit across the 4 stitches that are on my needle for this part. Things are going to flop around on you just a little bit, but it's not too bad. I think having that first row done before we introduce another needle makes things just a little bit more manageable. When we finish the first half of the stitches for that row, so there's 8 stitches in our row, I've knit across to the first 4 of them. I'm just going to rotate my needles around, and again making sure that I'm not knitting into the exact same stitch where my yarn is connected. I'm going to knit across the second half of the stitches from this row. And I do prefer to work my entire fingers this way, having my stitches on 2 needles and knitting with the 3rd, rather than introduce extra needles into there. Generally, if you were doing something larger like a hat or socks, you would go ahead and put your stitches on extra needles so that you're making more of a triangle or a square. I just find with the few number of stitches that you've got for your fingers, I find that's just too many needles. You're sliding things around just a little bit too much. So that shows you how you get started with a finger. And once you have done a couple of rounds here, things really do go together pretty quickly. And the nice thing about starting with fingertips is if something goes wrong, it doesn't take you very long to do those couple of rows. So that's how I would recommend getting started with your fingertips. And the nice thing about gloves is you get to practice this 10 times. You'll feel like a pro at the end.